Like the title of the video says, we are going to be covering C and D rank abilities for the Helminth system. Before I get into the C and D ranks, as I have listed them, I would like to talk about Xaku for a moment. So Xaku, I believe, is right here. I haven't built Xaku yet. Zata's Whisper gives you void damage. I have heard a couple things about it, like it not affecting Eidolons, it not scaling super well. I really don't know, and I'm not going to speak to the ability at all. I nor most people have not spent a lot of time with Xaku, as it is impossible to have done so. So I think B probably is a safe place to put it, but I'm not giving it an official rank right now, just because I really truly don't know, and some of the frames I have more or less experience with, but general community opinion, wiki information that's come out, myself having played them, my friends having played them, things like that, I can speak to most abilities. This one I can't, so I'm not going to. So that's it for Xaku. Let's go ahead and get into the C and D rank abilities. So I do have a different listing for my abilities that are very different in some cases than the community, and I will be going in my order that I have ranked them. I do have a numerical order that I've listed them in for myself. So starting off, we have Garuda's Blood Altar. So basically you dash across the ground, you hit an enemy, you CC them, pretty much for the entire duration of the ability, and instead of them being able to do something, they heal you. They heal all allies in an area based on missing health. This is a decent enough ability. It's a good heal. It scales very well if you are like an Umbral build, or if you have a lot of health like a Nidus or an Inaros or something, because it scales based on percentage of missing health. It doesn't have an augment currently. You can have up to 3 of them active at a time. Unfortunately, I just don't think it fits the meta that well. It's okay for some missions where you know you're going to be kind of standing around a lot, but for anything mobile, it's going to fall off very, very quickly. So I would give it kind of a highest C ranking. The highest C ranking I actually have. Next up, we have Trinity. Now, Trinity also made the B list for the community. I have placed her in C rank, slightly below Garuda. Basically, they changed this ability a little bit, and now it has a small heal over time and a big AoE, so it's just an outright heal now. And then if you hit the enemy, they release the pulse of AoE healing. So this is a decent ability, and it's probably an outright better heal than Garuda's Blood Altar, but the problem with it is the fact that you kind of have a hard time getting uptime with it, and you really have to focus fire on that specific enemy. So the changes that they made to it help a little bit with that, but whereas Garuda's Blood Altars have a distinct playstyle where you can kind of set up and stay in an area, Trinity's tries to be more on the move but doesn't succeed that well, especially considering there's arcanes and stuff like that that just outright replace healing abilities. I think Trinity's is a little bit lower than Garuda's. Different functionality, still okay-ish, just not currently in the meta. Next up, we have another B-lister according to the community, and that is Gauss's Thermal Sunder. Thermal Sunder is a very I don't know how to say it without being kind of intense about it, but the damage from the heat isn't that great. It really just isn't. It stacks multiplicatively with itself if you cast it a bunch of times. This thing doesn't have any battery interactions, so you can't really use it outside of Gauss super effectively. That being said, it doesn't do horrific damage. You're going to be able to do lower level content, and the heat proc will be pretty decent. But once you get into higher level content, it's going to get a lot worse pretty quickly. It doesn't have an augment, but it's sort of pseudo saving grace to me is its cold status. Cold status is okay, and you can kind of flash freeze enemies as well. That being said, if you were to use this in terms of a CC, there's way better CCs on the list. Like, way better CCs. You know, Radial Blind, Lull, literally, I mean, Silence, almost all the other B tier CCs, that at least according to the community, the B tier, and especially some of the ones that are up a little bit higher, are better than this. So I think this kind of does a lot of things. It just doesn't do them super well. So I would put this kind of mid to highest C rank in my opinion. Moving on, I have next up Zephyr's Airburst. Now this might be a little surprising because the community put it at D tier, and I understand why. But the changes to Zephyr's Airburst, where it does pull enemies, does put it back up into C rank for me. And I have made a video on this very recently. I did a lot of testing and a lot of deep diving on how this ability works. So if you want the details on it, please go check out that video, as I'm not going to go into it here. But suffice it to say, you do get a little bit of pull functionality with this ability. There are much better pulls on this list. However, they are in higher tiers. So I think this is a pretty solid average middle of the road C tier pick at this point. It's okay. You just kind of have to know how it works in order to get the most out of it. But it is very cheap and very spammable. So just keep that in mind. It is something to consider. I would not super recommend it over other things though. Moving on, we have Limbo's Banish. Limbo's Banish is one of those things that you either are going to love or you are going to hate. If you are my friends, you hate it. If you are me, you think it's interesting and really great in solo, but ultimately it's going to be super annoying to people. It really just is. So I put it in the C tier. You could very well make the argument that it's the strongest type of CC in the entire game. It literally nullifies an enemy's existence. So yeah, if you want to look at it from that perspective, insanely powerful. But from a general utility standpoint and from a team play standpoint, it's not worth picking up. But I did bump it up from a D just because the actual effect itself is so powerful. So moving on from Limbo, we have Nekros. Nekros is Terrify. This to me is one of the weirdest skills. So it's an AoE fear, which sounds awesome. In every MMO I've ever played, it feels awesome to do this, AoE fearing people. But in this game, it's just not how Warframe works, unfortunately. You don't want enemies running away from you, you want them running towards you. You either want to be getting, air for survival, or you're farming, so you want enemies to come to you and drop their loot near you. You never want enemies to run away from you unless they're an enemy that is super dangerous, in which case this ability probably doesn't work on them. So just keep in mind the skill is really weird for the game and how it works, and the augment is sad. I don't know another way to put it. Basically, when enemies are feared, they run away from you slower. It's like they knew it was bad and they knew it was wrong and they tried to fix it with the augment, and the augment is just, I don't even know. It's just sad. That's the only way I can put it. So yeah, not a good look. Not a good look. Next up, I have Hydroid. Now, Hydroid is an interesting one because I would really love to put this in B tier because it's such a cool skill. But unfortunately, it's just not good. It deals a bad damage type for most enemies. Basically, you call down an orbital strike on an area, and you have these little water missiles that come down and just beat the crap out of the ground and everything in it. It isn't super reliable as CC. If an enemy does get hit by the projectile or its splash damage, they will get knocked down. However, the AoE for these knockdowns are not nearly as big as the area you cast it in. So if you have a big giant AoE, you're really just going to have a big area you're affecting. And the chances of you hitting an enemy don't super go up. I have a video on how Tempest Barrage works if you want to check out the inner workings of it. But just keep in mind, this skill isn't going to be super reliable. And in general, that's like the most important thing for a CC ability. So if you have a CC ability, it needs to be reliable so that when you press it, it does the thing you think it's going to do, and it does it quickly. This doesn't do that. It does have an augment that puts corrosive procs on enemies, and this used to be actually really good. And if corrosive still worked the way it used to, I would put this up into B tier. But it doesn't. So I very, very, very seldomly see this get above like 3 corrosive procs on enemies. So I just don't see this being any good because those corrosive stacks fall off. And it's going to be way easier to just use a proper weapon. So in any case, we're kind of getting into the lower C ranks at this point. Next up, we have Inaros' Pocket Sand ability, Desiccation. This is probably up here because of a DE employee liking it. To be honest with you, I don't understand why it's up here otherwise. It is a conal AoE that has fairly short range, fairly short duration, and it does a minuscule amount of true damage that doesn't scale into endgame at all. Doesn't really even scale into mid-game, to be honest with you. And heals you for a very small amount. So, yeah, it does a lot of really interesting things. It just isn't good. There are better CCs. There are better damage dealers. There are better healing tools. I mean, it's just across the board, this thing is subpar. Now, because it does do a lot of good things, I have placed it into C instead of D. But pretty much in everything it does, it is subpar in that way. Next up, we have the augment for it, though, and the augment basically creates a little dude, or has a chance to create a dude that fights for you. I more often than not hate those type of abilities, though, as they just confuse me because, you know, small brain or whatever, and I try to shoot them for like 5 seconds before realizing, wait, that guy's on my team. And effectively what it boils down to is, do you want to spend a whole Warframe slot on an augment that is basically a radiation proc? And the answer to that is no. The answer is that no, you don't want to do that. That's bad. So in general, this is not a great ability. Does some cool things, doesn't do them very well. And then the final person I have on my C list is going to be Loki. Now Loki, his decoy ability is basically Molt but worse. It's effectively worse in most ways. It's squishier. It just in general isn't as good as a decoy. It just doesn't work well. It doesn't have an invulnerability phase. The only thing good about decoy, and the reason why it's in C at all, is because you have Savior Decoy as an augment. So effectively, if you can try to run away and hide your little decoy somewhere in a corner, if you die, it'll die instead of you. So it can save you from dying whenever you cast it. That's cool. Like, that's actually pretty good, but the base ability needs to be a lot better to be able to be pushed up into the higher tiers, and it just isn't, unfortunately. So that's actually going to cover it for the C tier skills. Next up, we're going to go over D tier. Now, D tier, I don't have a lot in here. I have Gara at the top. Gara's is at the actual very tippy top of D. I had a hard time placing, and Gara and Loki switched spots a couple times. I think this is probably about right. So this is a damaging ability that is a CC, and it has an augment. So it seems like, just at a cursory glance, that it'll be kind of okay. The damage is very bad. It doesn't scale very well. The CC is somewhat unreliable. It's okay-ish. And the augment is a joke. The augment is one of the worst augments in the game, if not the worst. I'm not even going to go into it, but it's really, really bad because of the way the skill works. So it's just not a great skill. There's a million better things that you can do instead of that, including just not swapping your Helminth ability at all. Most skills are better than this, because it just, one of the main things too, and I should have mentioned this first about this ability, is it has synergy for Gara that you don't get on other frames. So that hurts it a lot too, because you can't buff the ability too much because then the frame becomes more powerful. But yeah, it's just really not good. Next up, I have Frost. I don't think this is a C tier pick. In terms of CCs, I think it is outright worse than Pocket Sand. And that's kind of saying something. So effectively, this is a CC in the form of a bunch of status procs. So basically, enemies get hit with a lot of cold statuses, and they move slower, etc., etc. It's just not that great. The augment is kind of cool, but it just doesn't add enough to push it up, in my opinion. And in general, it just doesn't really match the meta all that much. I mean, CCs in general are pretty powerful, but this kind of CC where you have a conal and it's a slow and stuff like that, it doesn't open up any new opportunities. It doesn't give you finishers. It doesn't do anything like that. So in my opinion, this is one of the worst CCs on the list. And this list includes things like Spectre Rage and Terrify. So just keep that in mind. And then speaking of the worst, just most disgraceful ability, Mag's Pull. So Mag Pull. This thing is really, really bad. It pulls enemies towards you. They do get CC'd when you do that. It's so what, I guess, is the real... It has an animation that you have to wait through. And its augment is basically the vacuum augment for your Sentinel. But you have to put it on your Warframe as an augment slot. So the augment's really bad. So yeah, it's not good. It's really, really not good. And just in general, the augment for this is moving on. Sorry, I don't want to dwell on Mag too much because Mag's an interesting idea, but it's so much of a disappointment to me. And then finally in our list is Nyx. Nyx, I can't actually give Nyx the proper rating, unfortunately. So in my system, I actually have just given her a 0, and she is an F. So Mind Control. Effectively, Mind Control is an ability that you can steal, and then for energy, you can cast it, and it becomes a radiation proc. Yeah, it's really, really that bad. So effectively, you get this guy, and maybe there's some upsides to it, but basically you get this guy that follows you around and helps you and shoots people and stuff, right? The problem with this though is it's never that effective. It's just never going to be that effective. It's gonna almost always, you're gonna always want to have like some sort of super specific enemy that you're looking for. So it changes your playstyle a little bit in an annoying way, in my personal opinion. But in addition to that, the augment increases your followers' damage by like 500%. So I will say the augment really, really tries to help the skill out. In a way like Diablo developers tried to buff sets in Diablo 3, where they just gave set bonuses 17,000% increased damage, and they thought that was good. So yeah, the skill, it's really bad. It's so pointless in the meta and with the way statuses and conditions work, and there's no reason to ever take this, in my opinion. And if you take it, cool. You know, you want to have a mind control thing, I get it, but you could just pick radiation instead. Put it on your weapon, a 5% status chance, and it's still better than, you know, Nyx's mind control. So anyway, that is going to conclude it for my tier list. If I have made any mistakes, if I missed anyone, misrepresented any of the frames, any of the abilities, be sure to let me know in the comment section below, and thanks for watching.